There is a particular kind of silence that follows the shattering of a world. It's not peaceful, it's a vacuum, a hollow roar that swallows all other sound. For my family, the shattering was my father's will. The silence was the rest of our lives. He was Arthur Reed, a man who built an empire from sheer force of will. And with that same will, he dismantled his own family with a single legal document. He left his entire fortune to a woman he'd known for 3 years. To his children, he left the ghost of our mother, condensed into a single piece of furniture, a worn, old armchair. We saw it as a final cruel joke, a monument to his indifference. We were wrong. It was a message in a bottle, tossed into the turbulent sea of his mistakes, and I was the only one who bothered to open it. My name is Alexander Reed. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you have to understand the players. My father, Arthur Reed, was a titan of industry, a man whose presence could bend a room to his will. My older sister, Eleanor, is a shark in the courtroom, her mind a razor-sharp instrument of logic and strategy. My brother, Benjamin, is a cardiologist, a healer who believes in fixing what's broken. And then there's me, the architect, the artist, the family dreamer. I was always the one who valued the blueprint of a memory more than the cold, hard steel of reality. On the day my father's will was read, that reality collapsed in on itself, and all I was left holding was a blueprint for a life that no longer existed. This is the story of how that blueprint was hidden in plain sight, waiting for the one person who still believed in ghosts. Havenwood wasn't just a house. It was a fortress. My father built the walls, the shipping empire, the wealth, the reputation. But my mother, Evelyn, she was the mortar that held it all together. She was the quiet center in the storm of my father's ambition. Her armchair, that old, worn thing, was her command center. It was where she'd read us stories of knights and dragons, where she'd soothed our childhood fears, and where, in her final years, she sat, growing thinner and more translucent, as if she were slowly becoming one of the ghosts she so loved to read about. My father's love was a roaring fire, warm, but dangerous if you got too close. My mother's was like the sun on your back on a cold day, constant, steady, and life-giving. I never imagined a world where one could exist without the other. I was a fool. Fortresses don't fall slowly. They are breached in a single catastrophic moment. A massive coronary. No last words, no deathbed wisdom. Just a phone call from her terrified secretary that turned the world to ash. The king was dead, and the vultures, as they always do, began to circle. We gathered in the belly of the beast, the offices of Sterling and Sterling. The air was so thick with unspoken words you could choke on it. Mr. Sterling, a man who probably was born in a 3-piece suit, peered over his spectacles. There were no condolences. This was a transaction, and death was the commodity. He began to read the will. The legal preamble was a monotonous drone. I found myself focusing on the dust motes dancing in a sliver of sunlight, the slow, deliberate tick of a grandfather clock in the corner, the way Isabella's hands, perfectly manicured, devoid of any wedding band, rested perfectly still in her lap. She was a statue of serene sorrow. Then Mr. Sterling's voice changed. It became heavier, final. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. I, Arthur Reed, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby devise, bequeath, and give the entirety of my estate, of whatsoever kind and wheresoever situated, including all controlling and common shares in Reed Holdings Global, all real property, namely the primary residence known as Havenwood, the Aspen Lodge, the Nantucket Summer Residence, all investment portfolios, bonds, and liquid assets held in any financial institution, to my wife, Isabella Maria Reed, to have and to hold absolutely and in perpetuity. The entirety of my estate? The words were not words. They were a guillotine. They severed us from our name, our history, our future. He hadn't just written us out, he had actively chosen her. He had looked at his 3 children and his wife of 25 years, and he had chosen a stranger. The foundation of my entire life crumbled into dust in that single, breathless moment. No, Eleanor's voice was a low, dangerous tremor, barely above a whisper. The document is legal and binding, Ms. Reed. It has been properly witnessed and notarized. Your father was of sound mind. Sound mind? To disinherit his own children? His flesh and blood? This is coercion. This is undue influence. I will contest this. I will take this apart line by line until there's nothing left but the shreds of this farce. She stood up, her chair screeching violently against the polished floor. Mr. Sterling, please, there must be some mistake. A trust, a foundation for us, something. Benjamin's voice shook, his face pale. There is a final codicil. He paused, letting a sliver of hope, thin and cruel, enter the room. It reads, "To my children, Eleanor, Benjamin, and Alexander, I bequeath the personal items, effects, and memorabilia of their late mother, Evelyn Reed, to be divided amongst them as they see fit. These items are currently stored in the attic of the Havenwood residence." The fragile hope shattered. Eleanor let out a short, sharp, hysterical laugh that was devoid of any humor. Her things? You're giving us our mother's old junk? This is a joke. This is a sick, twisted joke from beyond the grave. She turned her fury on Isabella. And you heartless bitch, you did this. You poisoned him against us. Isabella looked up, her eyes wide with feigned hurt and innocence. Eleanor, please. Your father loved you all so much. This was his wish. He was so worried about my future, about me being alone and vulnerable. He wanted me provided for. This doesn't change his love for you. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My vocal cords felt severed. I just watched the scene unfold as if from the other end of a telescope. My father, the man who taught me to tie a tie, to read a balance sheet, to stand my ground, had in his final act reduced us to beggars at his own table. The battle raged around me. Eleanor's legal threats, Benjamin's desperate, rational appeals, Mr. Sterling's cold, implacable legalese. But I was already gone. I was already in the attic, surrounded by the gentle ghost of my mother, feeling a shame so profound it threatened to swallow me whole. The attic was the soul of the house, and we were there to perform an autopsy. The air was thick with the scent of cedar and nostalgia, a smell that now felt like a funeral dirge. Eleanor was a tornado of furious energy, yanking white sheets off furniture with violent jerking motions, sending plumes of dust into the air. Look at this! Her wedding china, her first edition Austen novels, her favorite shawl. She held up the delicate faded paisley fabric, her voice cracking. It's all here, every piece of her, and he just threw it at us, like we were charity cases, like she meant nothing. Elle, we need to be calm about this. We can't just tear through it all. We need to be methodical. We can't think when we're this angry. Benjamin tried to reason with her, his hands held out in a placating gesture. Don't you dare tell me to be calm, Benjamin. Don't you dare. He gave our birthright to a gold-digging sociopath. He spat on Mom's memory. I am not going to be calm. I am going to hire every forensic accountant, every private investigator, every psychiatrist on the Eastern Seaboard. I will prove he was not of sound mind. I will prove she manipulated him. I will burn that company to the ground before I let that woman have it. Their voices became meaningless noise. The entire universe had narrowed to that solitary, shrouded sentinel in the corner. I knew what it was. My bones knew. My blood knew. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and took a fistful of the coarse, white sheet. With a soft rustle, I pulled it away. A cloud of dust exploded into the sunbeams, dancing like a million tiny spirits set free. And there it stood, my mother's armchair. A high-backed, throne-like piece, upholstered in faded burgundy damask that was worn thin and soft on the arms and headrest. One of the carved wooden claw feet was badly chipped, a relic from when we were children and raced toy cars around its legs. This was more than furniture. This was her sanctuary. It held the echo of her voice reading the Chronicles of Narnia, the weight of her head as she napped, the scent of her lavender perfume that still seemed to cling to the fabric. I placed my palm flat against the worn spot on the armrest. It felt like coming home. The attic door opened with a creak. Isabella stood there, backlit by the harsh hallway light. She had changed into casual but exquisitely tailored cashmere pants and a sweater. The grieving widow costume had been discarded. She surveyed the scene with detached curiosity. So this is it, the famous Reed inheritance. Her voice was light, almost sing-song, laced with a subtle mockery. So much sentimental value. What do you want? Eleanor whirled around, her eyes blazing. I just wanted to see if you needed any boxes. It's quite a lot to sort through, though I suppose you won't be taking much. She gazed over the chaotic piles of her mother's life with undisguised disdain. The new owners will be here next week to assess the property. You'll need to have everything cleared out by then. They're very eager to start the renovations. The new owners. Renovations. The words were a physical eviction notice, not just from a house, but from our own history. They were going to strip the wallpaper, tear out the kitchen where we'd had breakfast, paint over the marks on the door frame that charted our growth. They were going to erase us. Get out. Eleanor's voice was low and deadly. Isabella sighed, as if dealing with tiresome children. Always so dramatic, Eleanor. Very well. Don't linger too long in the past, darlings. It's terribly unhealthy. She gave a final, condescending smile that didn't reach her cold eyes, and disappeared, closing the door behind her with a soft, definitive click. The silence she left behind was absolute, heavier and more profound than before. What are we going to do? Benjamin asked, running a hand through his hair, looking utterly lost. We fight. We take all of this, we inventory every last teacup, and we fight. We use whatever value is here to fund the legal battle of a lifetime. I'll take the chair. The words were quiet, but they cut through the tension like a blade. They both turned to stare at me as if I'd just spoken in tongues. Alex, for God's sake, not now. We don't have time for this sentimental paralysis. We need a strategy, not a relapse. Eleanor's frustration was a palpable force. My strategy is the chair. My voice was low but firm, leaving no room for argument. You two can have the rest. The china, the silver, the jewelry, the first editions. Divide it. Sell it. Use it to fund your war. I don't care. I don't want any of it. I finally turned to face them, my expression not one of weakness, but of a strange, resolute peace. I want this. They saw a broken man, clinging to a piece of junk, a useless, sentimental fool who couldn't face the hard, cold truth. But in that moment, the chair was the only thing that felt real. The money, the company, houses, it was all part of my father's world of leverage and power that had just catastrophically betrayed us. This chair belonged to my mother. It was a relic from a time before the silence, a time when this family was built on a foundation of love, not legalities. It was the only piece of the fortress that had remained uncorrupted, untouched by my father's final, devastating act. I didn't know it then, as I stood there facing their disappointed stares, but I was right. That chair wasn't just a memory, it was a lifeboat. My mother, in her infinite and quiet wisdom, had seen the storm coming.
She had built a lifeboat and hidden it in the heart of the sinking ship, knowing that one day her children would need it. And I, the family dreamer, the one they all underestimated, had been the only one to recognize it for what it was. I had just climbed inside, and the journey back to the surface was about to begin. The armchair stood in my modest apartment like a sovereign in exile, its faded burgundy damask and chipped claw feet a stark contrast to the clean, minimalist lines of my modern furniture. For 3 days, it remained an untouched monument, a silent accusal, and a painful comfort. I found myself orbiting it, making coffee only to stand in the kitchen doorway and stare, watching television, with my attention perpetually drifting to its imposing presence. It was more than furniture. It was a question my mother had posed from beyond the grave, and I was terrified of the answer. My phone buzzed incessantly. Eleanor's calls, sharp and demanding, went to voicemail. "Alex, for God's sake, pick up. We need to present a united front. The preliminary hearing is next week." Benjamin's texts, laced with worried emojis and pleas for unity, went unanswered. "Hey, just checking in. This is hard on all of us. Maybe we could have dinner. Elle is, well, you know how she gets." They were waging their war from the front lines, hiring teams of lawyers, consulting forensic accountants, preparing legal briefs to contest the will. They were fighting for the gleaming, empty shell of our father's empire. I, meanwhile, was sitting in the quiet company of its dethroned and misunderstood queen, trying to decipher her final, silent message. The fourth night brought a tempest. A spring storm of biblical proportions rolled in over the city skyline. Rain lashed against my windows in horizontal sheets, and the wind screamed like a chorus of the damned, rattling the glass in its frames. The violent energy outside seemed to amplify the profound silence within my apartment. I sat on the floor, my back against the sturdy frame of the armchair, a glass of cheap whiskey warming in my hand. The amber liquid did little to calm the storm inside me, the tempest of grief, betrayal, and now a dawning, terrifying understanding. I leaned my head back, letting the worn fabric press against my scalp, inhaling the faint, ghostly scent of lavender and old books that still clung to it. It was then, in that moment of exhausted surrender, that I felt it. A subtle, almost imperceptible irregularity in the textile just below the right armrest. A patch of fabric that felt slightly rougher, less supple under my fingertips, like a scar on otherwise smooth skin. My architect's eye, trained over years to spot the slightest deviation in a line, the most minor flaw in a surface, zeroed in on the anomaly. This was no manufacturing defect. This was deliberate. This was a secret door. My breath caught in my throat. Setting the whiskey glass down with a hand that had begun to tremble, I shifted onto my knees, my heart hammering a frantic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. I ran my fingertips over the spot again and again, mapping its edges. It was hidden in the shadow cast by the armrest, a rectangle about the size of a postcard. The stitching here was different, finer, tighter. The thread a near perfect match, but of a slightly higher quality, sewn with a precision that spoke of careful, clandestine work, perhaps done by lamplight while the rest of the house slept. With a reverence usually reserved for holy sites, I fetched my architectural toolkit, the metal case clicking open with a sound that echoed in the tense quiet. Under the warm, focused pool of light from my desk lamp, the chair seemed to transform from a piece of sentimental furniture into a complex puzzle box, a cryptex holding my family's true legacy. I selected a surgical-grade blade, its steel edge glinting in the yellow light. The world dissolved until there was only the point of that blade, the rebellious stitches, and the thunderous beating of my own heart. One by one, with the painstaking care of a bomb disposal expert, I severed the tiny threads. The sound of each tiny snip was deafening in the quiet room, a counterpoint to the howling wind outside. The last thread gave way, and a small, hidden flap of fabric fell back, revealing a dark, narrow cavity within the chair's inner sanctum, a space that had held its breath for years. I reached in, my fingers brushing against something cool and smooth. Leather.
My pulse roared in my ears as I carefully extracted the object. It was a journal. Small, elegant, bound in soft chestnut brown leather that was worn soft at the edges and corners from frequent handling. My mother's initials, E.R., were embossed in faded gold leaf on the cover. I held it in my hands as if it were a sacred text, the physical manifestation of her whisper from beyond the grave. This was her voice, preserved in ink and intent, a voice I had ached to hear for 5 long years. I opened it. Her handwriting, so familiar and yet a sight I hadn't seen in 5 long years, flowed across the first page in elegant looping cursive. The date at the top was just 6 months before the cancer finally took her. September 12th. Arthur is hiding something. The company is not what it seems. He's been having hushed phone calls late at night, his voice a low, anxious rumble in his study. I caught the words "the serpent" and "debts that can never be repaid." He thinks I don't notice, lost in my books and my illness, but I see the fear in his eyes. It's a look I've never seen before. Not in the man who faced down corporate raiders and shipping strikes without a flicker of doubt. This is a deeper, more primal terror. The terror of a man who has looked into the abyss and seen his own reflection. He jumps at shadows now. The doorbell, a car backfiring on the street. My strong, unshakable Arthur is afraid, and that frightens me more than any diagnosis. I turned the page, the paper rustling like dry leaves. My hands were shaking so badly I had to steady them against my knees. October 3rd. He's moving assets, creating a labyrinth of shell companies with names I've never heard of. Cerberus Holdings, Styx Investments, names from mythology, names that guard the underworld. He says it's for tax purposes, a new international strategy to shield us from market volatility. But I know my husband. This is not strategy. This is survival. This is the behavior of a man building a lifeboat in the dead of night, hoping the storm won't notice. But who is he building it for? Us? Or just himself? He won't talk to me about it. He pats my hand and tells me not to worry, that he has everything under control, but his eyes tell a different story. They are the eyes of a man drowning. The entries continued, each one a layer of dread, peeled back, revealing a rotting core beneath the gilded surface of our lives. She wrote of secret meetings in the witching hour, of figures arriving in unmarked black cars that idled at the end of our long driveway. She documented coded transfers to offshore accounts in the Caymans and Switzerland, noting down numbers and dates with a clinical precision that belied the fear in her words. Her keen eye had noted his growing paranoia, the new, state-of-the-art security system installed overnight, his refusal to discuss business at home, the way he jumped at sudden noises, his hand sometimes trembling so badly he could barely hold his morning coffee cup. Reed Holdings, the empire we all thought was built on unshakable pillars of steel and savvy, was a facade, a glittering stage set for a tragedy, and behind the curtain lurked something much darker, much more fragile, something called the serpent. October 28th. He came to me tonight. He didn't have to say a word. He just laid his head in my lap, right here in this chair, and wept. Great, shuddering sobs that seemed to tear him apart from the inside. He said he'd made a deal with the devil to save the company during the '08 crash. He said the devil's name was Mikhail Volkov. The debt was supposed to be manageable, but it's a hydra.
For every head you cut off, 2 more grow back. He's been paying for years, but the principal never
Down. It only grows. He's been bleeding the company dry to feed the beast, and now the beast is hungry for more than money. Then came the final entry. The date was just 2 weeks before she passed. The script was hastier, less controlled, the letters slanting precipitously, as if written in a moment of panic or grim final resolution. The ink was a different color, a desperate bold blue instead of her usual serene black. November 18th. They're closing in. Arthur confirmed my worst fears today. He broke down in my sitting room, right here on this chair. The empire he built is a house of cards, and the wind is starting to blow. The serpent is not a metaphor. It's a syndicate, he said. Russian or maybe Italian, he wasn't even sure. They provided capital when he was vulnerable, and now the debt has come due with impossible interest. The debts are not financial, they are blood debts. He's trapped. He signed things, he said, things that can never be unsigned. He's given them power of attorney over certain accounts, signed over deeds as collateral. He is a ghost in his own company. He has a plan, a terrible, brilliant, heartbreaking plan. He will write a new will. He will leave everything to Isabella. He says she is young, beautiful, and expendable. She will be the shiny object they chase. They will think he hid his fortune with his new, young wife. They will come for her, and while they are distracted, he will try to find a way out. But if he fails, he will have made us, his children, paupers. And paupers are of no interest to dragons. He is sacrificing his name, his legacy, his children's love to save our lives. He is walking into the fire so we won't feel the heat. I cannot let this be his only legacy. I cannot let you children remember him as a monster. I've taken steps to protect you. Everything you'll need, everything that's real and clean and untouchable, is hidden where only someone who truly loved me would think to look. The chair holds more than memories. It holds your future. Follow the pattern in the fabric. The truth is in the flowers. I looked up from the journal, my vision blurring with tears I hadn't realized I'd been holding back. The room tilted and spun around me. The foundation of my grief, my anger, my sense of betrayal, it all crumbled, replaced with a devastating, awe-inspiring understanding that left me breathless. My father wasn't a monster. He was a desperate, cornered man trying to protect his family in the only way he knew how, a way that required him to become the villain in our story. His will wasn't a rejection, it was a desperate, brutal act of love. He had pushed us away, had made us hate him, to make us unappealing, worthless targets for the predators circling him. He had given everything to Isabella, making her the glittering, disposable decoy, the lamb led to the slaughter. And my mother? She had known, all along. She had known. She had been the silent general, the keeper of the true will, the architect of our real inheritance. While we saw a frail woman fading away, consumed by her own illness, she was waging a secret war to secure our future, using the last of her strength to build this ark, this time capsule of truth. My eyes, now clear and sharp with purpose, snapped back to the chair, to the intricate woven narrative of roses and thorns. Follow the pattern in the fabric. The truth is in the flowers. I fell to my knees before the chair, my fingers becoming my eyes. I traced every curve of every petal, every sharp, defensive thorn, every gently curling leaf. The pattern was a complex, continuous weave, a story of beauty and pain intertwined, a perfect metaphor for our family. I examined it for what felt like an hour, my touch as light as a butterfly's wing, my breathing shallow. And then, on One specific full-bloomed rose nestled near the base of the chair's back, almost where it would touch the small of my mother's back when she sat. I saw it.
Woven deep within its crimson and cream petals was a single brilliant thread of gold. It was so subtle, so perfectly integrated, that it was virtually indistinguishable unless you were looking for it, unless you knew to look for it. It was a flaw, a deliberate, beautiful flaw. A golden road on a woven map. Using a pair of fine-tipped tweezers from my kit, my hand now steady with a grim, focused certainty, I gently tugged on the golden thread. It didn't snap. Instead, it began to pull free, slithering out from the weave like a slender metallic serpent, coiling in a small, gleaming pile on the floor beside me. It wasn't part of the damask. It was a separate strand, a guide wire, a key carefully threaded through the pattern. As I pulled, a small, perfectly concealed seam along the stem of the rose, a seam I never would have noticed, began to loosen its grip. With a final, gentle tug, a small, flat panel of the fabric, shaped like a leaf, came away in my hand. Behind it, nestled deep within the chair's ancient, dusty horsehair stuffing, was a small, drawstring pouch of black velvet, heavy with promise, cold from its long seclusion. My hands were no longer shaking as I lifted it out. It was the weight of a secret. I poured its contents into my cupped palm. They weren't the gold coins or glittering jewels of a pirate's fantasy. They were something infinitely more valuable, more dangerous. A single, unmarked silver key, cold and weighty, simple in its design. A tiny, black encrypted USB drive that seemed to swallow the light, a sliver of modern technology hidden in an antique, and a single, brittle piece of parchment-like paper folded into a tight, small square, crackling with age and intention. I unfolded the paper with the reverence of an archaeologist unrolling a scroll from a pharaoh's tomb, afraid it might turn to dust in my hands. It was a hand-drawn map, labeled in my mother's precise architectural script, the same hand that had sketched garden plans and birthday card illustrations. It depicted the old, neglected boathouse on the far shore of the lake at Havenwood, a place of childhood summers, of skipped stones and stolen kisses that we hadn't used in over a decade. The drawing was remarkably detailed, showing the specific layout of the floorboards inside. One board, third from the western wall, fifth from the door, was marked with a precise inked X. Next to it, she had written just 2 words, but they sent a jolt of lightning through my entire being, a current of fear and exhilaration. His confession. I stared at the 3 objects lying in my palm, the weight of their collective meaning both crushing and exhilarating. The key, the drive, the map. They were not just our inheritance, they were a weapon. They were the combination to the vault containing the truth that could dismantle the dangerous, sacrificial lie my father had been forced to construct. This was the evidence that could clear his name, that could expose the serpent, that could, potentially, save Isabella from a fate she likely didn't fully comprehend, and that could give my siblings and me our family back, even if it was only in memory. The storm outside was finally beginning to subside, the rain softening to a gentle patter, the wind now a weary sigh. But a new, more terrifying storm was brewing inside me. The winds of it were named truth and consequence. My father's betrayal was a lie. My mother's silence was a shield. And I, Alexander Reed, the family dreamer, the sentimentalist everyone had underestimated, now the sole keeper of a secret that could either redeem my father's memory and save my family, or pull us all down into the dark, violent undertow he had tried so desperately to keep us from. The lifeboat my mother had so ingeniously built was not for calm seas. It was a vessel designed for a hurricane, armed with truth as its only cannon. and I now had no choice but to raise its sails, grip the helm with white-knuckled hands, and steer it directly into the storm's raging, unforgiving heart. The journey to Havenwood, to the boathouse, to my father's confession, began now. The silver key felt like a shard of ice in my palm, its coldness seeping deep into my skin. For a long moment, I simply knelt there on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by the ghost of my mother's presence, the weight of her words pressing down on me. The journal lay open beside me, its pages a testament to a love so fierce it had orchestrated this entire elaborate scheme from a deathbed. My father wasn't the villain. He was a tragic hero, and my mother had been his secret keeper. A sudden, sharp knock at my door shattered the silence. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Had they found me? The serpent? Was Isabella checking up on her inheritance? I scrambled to my feet, my movements frantic. I swept the journal, the key, the USB drive, and the map into the velvet pouch and shoved it deep into the pocket of my jeans. The loose flap of fabric on the armchair hung open like a wound. I grabbed a roll of black duct tape from my toolkit and hastily secured it, a crude, temporary fix that felt like a desecration. The knock came again, more insistent. "Alex, I know you're in there. Your car is downstairs." It was Benjamin's voice, laced with a weary concern that immediately drained the adrenaline from my body, replacing it with a different kind of tension. I opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, looking haggard. His usually crisp shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked past me, his gaze landing immediately on the armchair, which now looked like a patient after failed surgery, the duct tape a stark black scar on its burgundy skin. "Really, Alex?" he sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. This is what you're doing while Eleanor and I are trying to salvage what's left of our family, playing hide-and-seek with a piece of old furniture?" He stepped inside without an invitation, his presence making my small apartment feel even smaller. "It's not what you think." "It never is with you," he replied, his tone not unkind, just exhausted. "Look, Eleanor is on the warpath. She's filed the papers to contest the will. She's citing undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. She's going to drag Dad's name through the mud, Alex. She's going to stand in a courtroom and tell a judge and a room full of strangers that our father was a senile old fool manipulated by a pretty face." The image made me feel sick. That was exactly what my father wanted them to think. It was the cornerstone of his entire desperate plan. "Ben, you have to stop her." "Stop her?" He let out a short, bitter laugh. "How? You've seen her when she gets like this. She's a force of nature. And frankly, from where she's standing, she's right. What would you have her do? Roll over and let that woman walk away with everything?"
Yes, I screamed internally. Because it's a trap. Because it's the only way he could think to protect us. But the words stuck in my throat. How could I tell him? How could I explain the journal, the serpent, the encrypted drive? He was a doctor, a man of science and reason. He would think the grief had finally broken me. He would call Eleanor and they would have me committed, and the truth would be buried forever. "I have my reasons," I said lamely, my hand instinctively moving to my pocket, feeling the outline of the pouch. "Your reasons are sentimentality, Alex. This isn't one of your architectural models you can just abandon when it gets too hard. This is real life." He gestured wildly at the chair. This thing is a symbol of everything that's wrong. Dad threw Mom's memory in our faces, and you're treating it like a holy relic." He didn't understand. He couldn't. The chasm between us felt wider than ever. He was fighting the lie, and I was the only one who knew the truth, a truth that was too dangerous to share. Just give me a little time, Ben," I pleaded, my mind racing. I needed to get to Havenwood. I needed to see my father's confession. I needed proof.
Tell Eleanor to slow down. Just a week, please. He studied my face, his doctor's eyes searching for signs of fever or madness. Why? What can possibly change in a week? I need to figure some things out. It was a pathetic answer, and we both knew it. He shook his head, a profound sadness settling on his features. I can't hold her off, Alex. The hearing is in 10 days. She's not going to stop. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. We're your family, Alex. We're supposed to be in this together. Don't get so lost in the past that you forget you have a present. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone with the echo of his words and the heavy secret in my pocket. Together. The word was a mockery. We were more fractured than ever, and I was the one holding the fissure open by keeping silent. I couldn't wait. I had to go now. The drive to Havenwood the next morning was a surreal journey through a ghost landscape of my own memories. Every familiar turn of the road, every old oak tree was now viewed through the new, horrifying lens of my mother's journal. That field wasn't just where we flew kites, it was a place my father might have scanned for unfamiliar cars. That quiet country pub wasn't just where we'd had Sunday lunches. It could have been a place he met with Volkov's men.
The old boathouse came into view, a dilapidated structure of gray, weathered wood sagging at the water's edge. It smelled of damp rot and forgotten summers. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs as I pulled out the map, my mother's lines and angles a perfect match to the decaying reality before me. The interior was dim, lit only by slivers of light cutting through the cracks in the walls. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams like agitated spirits. The floor was a patchwork of wide, warped pine boards. I counted carefully. 3rd from the western wall, 5th from the door. I knelt, my knees pressing into the gritty, cold wood. The board looked no different from the others. I took the silver key from the pouch. It wasn't for a lock. I inserted the tip into a nearly invisible seam along the edge of the board and pried. With a groan of protesting nails and wood, the board lifted. Beneath it was a shallow, hidden compartment, just deep enough for a single, waterproof metal lockbox. My hands were trembling again as I lifted it out. It was cold and heavy. There was no lock, just a simple latch. I took a deep, steadying breath, the scent of lake water and decay filling my lungs, and opened the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a sleek digital voice recorder. Next to it was a stack of documents and a single sealed envelope with my name written on it in my father's bold, slashing handwriting. I pressed play on the recorder. There was a long moment of silence, then the sound of a man clearing his throat, a ragged, weary sound. When he spoke, his voice was a hollow echo of the commanding baritone I remembered. It was stripped of all its power, filled only with a bottomless regret. Alexander, if you are hearing this, then your mother's plan worked, and I have failed. The words were spoken softly, but they hit me with the force of a physical blow. I have spent my life building walls, thinking they would protect you. Now I must tear them all down with my own hands. He began to speak, and for the next hour I sat on the cold, dirty floor of the boathouse and listened to my father's confession. He spoke of Mikhail Volkov, a man with eyes the color of a winter sky and just as cold. He detailed the initial loan, the escalating demands, the threats that first were veiled, then became terrifyingly explicit. He described the shell companies, the siphoning of funds, the slow, methodical evisceration of his life's work to feed a debt that was designed to be eternal. The will, leaving everything to Isabella, his voice broke. It was the most difficult thing I have ever done, to make you hate me, to see the betrayal in your eyes, in Eleanor's eyes. It killed a part of me, but it was the only way. Volkov's people are watching. They will see the will. They will see the children get nothing. They will see a vain old man who left his fortune to his trophy wife. You will be safe. You will be poor, but you will be alive. And your mother
your brilliant, brave mother, she ensured you would not be poor. He went on, his voice growing stronger, laced with a fiery paternal pride. The USB drive. It contains everything. Bank account numbers, routing numbers for accounts in your mother's maiden name in Switzerland. They are untouchable. They are yours. The documents are the proof. Signed,
Affidavits from a private investigator, copies of the original loan agreements, everything you need to expose Volkov if you ever feel safe to do so. There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of his shaky breathing. I am so sorry, my boy, for the man I became, for the lies, for the pain. I wanted to give you the world. Instead, I have given you a war. But your mother, she gave you the weapons to fight it. Use them wisely. I love you. I have always loved you. Remember me. Please try to remember the man I was before the fear. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the gentle lap of water against the boathouse pilings. I sat there for a long time, the recorder clutched in my hand, tears streaming down my face, not of sadness, but of a devastating, overwhelming understanding. I picked up the envelope with my name on it and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Alex, if you found this, you have her journal. You know the truth. Now you carry the weight of it. Your siblings cannot know, not yet. The danger is too real. Volkov's reach is long. You must let Eleanor's lawsuit play out. You must let the world believe the lie. It is the armor that protects you. The money is yours. Rebuild. Be the man I always knew you could be. Forgive me. Dad. I carefully placed the recorder and the documents back into the lockbox, but I kept the letter, folding it and placing it in my pocket next to the velvet pouch. I had the proof, I had the truth, and I had an impossible choice. Honor my father's final wish and let my sister publicly destroy his name, or risk all our lives by revealing the truth too soon. I left the boathouse as I had come, a ghost moving through the woods, but I was no longer the same man. I was no longer just Alexander Reed, the dreamer. I was the keeper of the flame. I was the silent soldier in my father's war. And as I got into my car and drove away from Havenwood, I knew my childhood was not just over, it had been erased, rewritten by a truth more terrifying than any lie. The lifeboat was now a warship, and I was its captain, sailing into the most dangerous waters of all, the future. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold against the rainy night as I drove back from Havenwood, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The voice recorder in my pocket felt like a live coal, burning through the fabric, searing my skin with my father's confession. You must let the world believe the lie. It is the armor that protects you. The words echoed in the rhythm of the windshield wipers, a grim mantra for the new life I had just inherited. I pulled into the underground parking of my apartment building, the concrete cavern feeling more like a bunker than a home. The elevator ride up was interminable. When I finally stepped inside my apartment, the door clicking shut behind me sounded like the seal on a tomb. The room was dark, but the silhouette of the armchair was unmistakable, its duct-taped wound a dark scar in the moonlight. I didn't turn on the lights. I stood there breathing in the silence, feeling the weight of the truth settle on my shoulders like a lead cloak. I went to my desk, the familiar action of booting up my computer feeling alien and dangerous. My fingers, cold and clumsy, pulled the encrypted USB drive from the velvet pouch. It was sleek, black, impersonal. The key to a fortune, the trigger to a war. When I plugged it in, a single stark password prompt blinked on the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. I typed the 2 words that were my inheritance. Evelyn Shaw. The digital vault unlocked with a soft chime. The screen filled with a meticulously organized file structure. Folders named with cold, clinical precision. Swiss_accounts. Volkov_evidence. legal_documents, boathouse. I clicked on Swiss_accounts first, my breath catching in my throat. Spreadsheet after spreadsheet opened, a river of numbers that made my head spin. Account balances in Swiss francs, US dollars, euros. The totals ran into tens of millions. They were held under the umbrella of Shaw Family Trust, with sub-entities named Cerberus Holdings and Styx Investments, the mythical guardians of the underworld my mother had written about. This was the lifeboat. Not just a small vessel for survival, but a fortified ark containing the true wealth my father had painstakingly, secretly salvaged from the crumbling empire of Reed Holdings. It was more money than I could comprehend, and it was all clean, untraceable, and mine. Next, I opened the Volkov_evidence folder. It felt like stepping into a cold, dark room. The first file was a PDF biography of Mikhail Volkov. Born in Odessa, former KGB, now a private investor, with holdings across Europe and Asia. His photograph stared back at me, a man in his late 60s, with a perfectly trimmed silver beard and eyes the color of a frozen lake. My father's description didn't do them justice. They were utterly devoid of warmth or mercy, the eyes of a great white shark assessing prey. There were financial records, complex webs of transactions snaking through shell companies in Cyprus and the British Virgin Islands, but the most chilling files were the transcripts, dozens of them, from intercepted phone calls and, I suspected, hidden microphones. I clicked on one dated just 3 months before my father's death. Unidentified voice 1. Heavy Russian accent. The payment is insufficient, Arthur. The principal remains. Arthur Reed. Voice strained, tired. I'm moving as much as I can without triggering alarms. The SEC. We do not care about your SEC. We care about our agreement. The serpent is hungry. Feed it, or it will feed on you. And it prefers fresh meat. Your daughter, Eleanor, she has a lovely family, does she not? 2 little girls. Such bright futures. A beat of silence, then a shaky, defeated sigh from my father. Arthur Reed. You'll have the rest by the end of the month. Unidentified voice 1. See that we do. We are always watching. I slammed the laptop shut, my stomach churning. It was one thing to read my mother's fears in her journal. It was another to hear the tangible, ugly threat in that cold, accented voice. They had threatened Eleanor's children, my nieces. The armor of the lie wasn't just for me and Benjamin. It was for everyone I loved. A new email notification popped up on my screen, pulling me from the horrifying transcript. It was from Eleanor's lawyer, carbon copied to me and Benjamin. The subject line was stark. Notice of deposition. Isabella Reed, schedule and topics. The legal machine was grinding forward, relentless and oblivious. My sister was preparing to eviscerate Isabella on the stand, to use her as the blunt instrument to break the will, and my role, dictated by my father from beyond the grave, was to be a silent accomplice. The next week was a descent into a special kind of hell. I became a specter, haunting the silent, sterile corridors of the city's central library, using their public computers to continue my grim education into Volkov's world. Each day peeled back another layer of the onion, each more noxious than the last. I found links to politicians in 3 European countries, to arms dealers, to suspicious deaths of business rivals that were officially labeled as accidents. This wasn't a corporate raider. This was a predator at the top of the global food chain. I met Benjamin for coffee in a noisy, bright cafe, the normalcy of the setting a jarring contrast to the darkness swirling inside me. He looked exhausted, the weight of being the family peacemaker finally starting to crush him.
Eleanor's deposition is tomorrow, he said, staring into the swirling depths of his latte. She's got a forensic accountant lined up. She's gonna go after every wire transfer, every credit card statement. She's gonna paint Isabella as a calculating whore who preyed on a confused old man. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Are you sure you won't be there? We need to show the judge we're a united family. I looked at my brother, this good, decent man who believed in fixing things, and felt a love for him so sharp it was like a knife in my heart. He was trying to glue the pieces of our family back together, not knowing the pieces were part of a bomb. I can't, Ben, I said, my voice rough. I can't. He sighed, a sound of profound defeat. What is happening to you, Alex? This obsession with that chair, it's not healthy. It's like you've retreated into some fantasy world while the real world is falling apart. The real world is far worse than you can possibly imagine, I thought. I'm dealing with things in my own way, I said, the lie a bitter pill on my tongue. The day of the deposition, I didn't leave my apartment. I paced, I tried to read, I stared at the wall. My imagination tormented me with scenes from the lawyer's office, Eleanor, cold and brilliant, dissecting Isabella's life. Isabella, her polished facade cracking under the relentless pressure, her voice breaking as she was forced to confirm my father's declining mental state. I was allowing my father's name, his legacy, to be systematically destroyed to protect us. It felt like a betrayal worse than the one we had initially believed in. My phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Benjamin. It's over, he said, his voice flat, devoid of any triumph. Eleanor's deposition was merciless. Isabella broke down completely. She admitted Dad was paranoid, that he'd changed the passwords on his accounts, that he talked about people watching him. It's all in the transcript. It's a slam dunk, Alex. We're going to win. We'll get the company back, the houses, everything.
A victory that tasted like ashes. We were winning the legal battle and losing the war for my father's soul. Every accusation of paranoia, every hint of confusion was a nail in the coffin of his reputation, and I had supplied the hammer by my silence. That's great, Ben, I managed to force out, the words sticking in my throat. There's more, he said, his tone shifting, becoming hesitant. After it was over, Isabella approached me. She was different, pale, shaken. She said, tell him to be careful with his mother's things. Some ghosts are better left buried. Then she just walked away. The air in my lungs turned to ice. She knew. The comment about the chair wasn't a random barb. Had my father, in a moment of weakness, hinted at the truth? Had Volkov's people, watching the legal proceedings, deduced something and leaned on her? The carefully constructed armor, the lie we were all living, had just developed its first hairline crack. The danger was no longer an abstract concept in a digital file, it was seeping into our reality. That night, sleep was impossible. Paranoia, my father's unwelcome legacy, took root in my mind and bloomed in the dark. Every car that slowed a little too much outside my building was Volkov's men. Every creak of the old apartment building floorboards was an assassin on the stairs. I lay in the dark, the USB drive and the silver key now hidden in a hollowed-out book on my shelf, feeling like a prisoner awaiting execution. The weight of the secret was crushing me. The isolation was a physical ache. 3 days later, it happened. I went to my mailbox in the lobby, a mundane daily ritual. Among the bills and junk mail was a plain, legal-sized manila envelope. No stamp, no return address, just my name, typed.
A cold dread trickled down my spine. I took it upstairs, my hands trembling. I tore it open. Inside was a single, glossy 8 by 10 photograph. It was a picture of me, taken from a car across the street, leaving the public library 2 days earlier. My face was clear, my expression preoccupied. I was holding the notebook where I had been scribbling my research on Volkov's European holdings. On the back of the photograph, written in a precise, impersonal block script, were 3 words: "Stop digging, Volkov." They had found me. The silent war was over. The serpent had smelled my scent, seen my shadow. It had lifted its head from the grass and fixed its frozen eyes upon me. The lifeboat was now a marked vessel. I had the truth, I had the fortune, and I had the full, terrifying attention of a monster. My father's desperate, brilliant plan was unraveling at the edges, and I was the only one who could see the fraying threads. I could no longer carry this alone. I had to get to Eleanor and Benjamin. I had to tell them everything. The time for silence, for hiding in the armor of the lie, was over. The real war was about to begin. The journey that began with a single, worn armchair taught me that the most profound truths are often hidden in plain sight, veiled by the lies we choose to believe. My father's final act was not of betrayal, but of unimaginable sacrifice, a desperate gambit to protect his family from a predator he could not defeat. My mother's quiet strength became our fortress, her love the blueprint for our survival. In the end, we did not inherit an empire of steel and glass, but something far more precious,
Valuable, the truth. A truth that cost my father his name, my mother her peace, and me my innocence. The serpent still slithers in the shadows, but we are no longer its prey. We are the keepers of a secret fortune and a dangerous truth, armed with the knowledge that some legacies are not measured in wealth, but in the courage to face the darkness and protect the light. The Reed family was not broken by the will, it was forged by it, tempered in the fire of a secret war into something new, resilient, and unbreakable. A year later, as I was transferring the final assets from the Shaw Family Trust, a hidden, encrypted subfolder I'd never noticed before unlocked itself on a specific date, my mother's birthday. Inside wasn't financial data, but a single scanned photograph of a woman who was my mother's mirror image, standing with a man I didn't recognize in front of a chateau in France. With the photo was a handwritten note, its paper brittle with age. If you are reading this, the danger from Volkov has passed. But there is another secret, Alexander. Your real inheritance is not the money. It is the truth about who you are. Find me in Provence. Your Aunt Celeste. The armchair had given up its first secret, but the second, it seemed, was just beginning to whisper.